My goodness. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now, I know I've told you this before. President Reagan, who Gil mentioned, told me once that if I ever give a speech and the audience gives me a standing ovation when I'm introduced, I ought to sit down because I had nowhere to go but down after that. So I'm proceeding at my own risk here. You are a great sight in Washington, D.C. We're living at a crazy, crazy time. And I got to tell you, my friends, when you listened, if you did last night, to the president in Minneapolis, and when you saw what was going on in the streets outside of that hall that he spoke at, this is exactly the right man to have as President of the United States. You know, right now, while we're here, the president is meeting with Premier Xi of China, trying to work out some kind of a trade deal. We'll see how it goes. And so let's talk a little bit about China and about the United States, because it's a really big deal for our future. You know, just a few weeks ago, China celebrated, quote unquote, the 70th anniversary on October 1 of, it was their national day, the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Some of the American media kind of misdescribed it. They said it was the 70th anniversary of China. No, that China's a little older than that. This was the 70th anniversary of the Communist Party of China taking over China. That's what it was. And it's hardly something to be celebrated. In fact, it's worth taking a look about what China did in the weeks and months leading up to October 1st. The Chinese government told all the Chinese television stations to take off the air during the day all the regular shows, all the regular programming for 60 days leading up to October 1st. And during those 60 days, all the programming was replaced with patriotic programming, historical dramas uplifting China, great patriotic speeches. There was a steady diet of this for 60 days. And then on October 1st, a carefully selected crowd was put in the streets of China. And as they waited in the streets for the big celebratory parade to start, you could hear the parade before you saw it. Because marching through the streets of Beijing into Tiananmen Square were tens of thousands of Chinese troops goose-stepping, reminiscent of Hitler's army in the 1930s. It was a complete militarized event. And it wasn't just the tens of thousands of soldiers. There were all kinds of weapons in the parade. And not just any weapon, weapons that, according to the press accounts, U.S. intelligence didn't know anything about. Now, that was a little disturbing. There was a supersonic missile that can travel 5 times the speed of sound. A new intercontinental ballistic missile that can hit any city in the United States. Underwater drones that have been weaponized to be used against, well, guess whose Navy? So when I read the articles about the surprise of our intelligence forces about all this, the thought crossed my mind, you know, in the last 10 years before Donald Trump, what were they busy doing? Oh, I remember some of them were busy interfering in America's political system instead of doing their job to protect the United States of America from our foreign enemies. And that, my friends, is sad. So these are the things that happened in China on October 1st. One military analyst who works at the Pentagon, didn't want to be named, said it was clear after watching that parade that the military edge the United States has had over any potential adversary in the world since the end of World War II was in fact gone. Now, what happened in the days leading up to October 1st wasn't something new in China. Every corner of Chinese life is telling their citizens, telling their young people that the future belongs to China, that they are part of a great nation, that there will be nothing that will stand in the way of the Chinese people. Even Chairman Mao, you remember him, Chairman Mao, the guy that wrote the Little Red Book, more infamously known as the man that is literally responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people in China as communism strengthened its grip on the nation. Even he's enjoying a facelift. He's being held back up to young Chinese as an example of what Chinese leadership can really be. That ought to disturb all of us. So think about this, ladies and gentlemen. In China, with their history, with all the things that they have done, with all of the acts of intolerance they are responsible for, of all the people that are rotting in their prisons, they have the confidence to teach their young people that the future belongs to them because they are part of an incredible country that nobody can stop. And what's going on at the same time here in the United States? A country that has promoted more liberty and more freedom for more people than any country in the history of the world. In the United States, in our schools, teachers at every level, beginning in elementary school to high school, all the way up to the universities, are teaching our children that America is an evil country and it was evil at its very birth. How can you explain that? You and I know of the greatness of America. I remember growing up and reading about the founders. Any one of them would have been an incredible blessing for a group of people like the early Americans trying to start a new nation and defeat the greatest power in the world at the time. But there wasn't just one. It wasn't just George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. There were dozens of men, any one of whom could have defined the age they were living in. I always took that as evidence that God's hands of blessing were on this nation at the very beginning. These were unbelievable intellects, men that understood that liberty doesn't come from government, that it comes from God. And because they believed that our liberty came from God, they told the citizens of the new nation that we're all made in the image of God. And because we're made in his image, this nation has always stood for the idea that it doesn't matter whether you're a newborn with Down syndrome, a 90-year-old with senility, it doesn't matter what your race is, you have dignity and value and worth. That's what this nation stands for. Your children and grandchildren, other in very isolated cases, are not being taught that. The history books being used in American schools are disgusting. They're not being taught about the founders, and if they are, they're being taught the wrong information. They're not being taught about what went on at Valley Forge or Concord Bridge or what the debates were about in Independence Hall. In fact, if they're being taught about anything about the founders, they're being taught to hate them. In fact, if you had to sum it up, they're basically being taught that the founders, for lack of a better phrase, are irredeemable and deplorable. Literally, they're being taught that the founders were white supremacists. Now, I know right-wing watch is here somewhere in the back of the room. They always come to the Values Voter Summit, and they selectively take quotes out of various people's speeches, and then they put them up on their website to condemn what we said. So just so I'm clear about this, whoever back there works for right-wing watch, I am not advocating that our schools should become little propaganda ministries teaching a whitewashed version of American history. That's not what I'm advocating. But what I am advocating is that our schools should not be helping America's enemies by teaching anti-American history. Now, here's what they hang their hat on, this anti-American history. The founders, like Thomas Jefferson, owned slaves. That's a terrible thing. One man owning another man is an abomination. It's not only a an offense against the moral law. It's an offense against the natural law. By the way, it was Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization, that established the values that meant that slavery would end. So Thomas Jefferson had slaves. That's a terrible thing. But because he was involved in that terrible thing, they can't give him credit for writing the Declaration of Independence or the second paragraph of that declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Those words brought the end of slavery eventually. Throughout history, virtually every continent, every tribe, every people, every nation has somewhere in their history slavery. It is a sad fact of the human condition. But to condemn the founding fathers who created this great nation with God's blessings, and to not teach our children what this great nation has done to bring liberty around the world, is not only malpractice, it is an intentional effort to destroy the natural love any human being has for the place of their birth. This is a scandal, and it's got to be addressed. Look, when Abraham Lincoln made the argument in the Lincoln-Douglas debates against slavery, he didn't attack the founding fathers. He embraced the founding fathers. He pointed to the founding documents. Lincoln said, "No man's been born with a saddle on his back, and other men born with spurs to ride him." He argued to the country that to fulfill the promises of our founding documents, slavery had to be eliminated. When Martin Luther King Jr. led the civil rights movement, he didn't attack America's founding. He didn't tell black Americans that America was evil. He didn't stand at the Lincoln Memorial and condemn Jefferson and Washington. He quoted from the Declaration of Independence. He told the country, we're not anti-America. We want to be fully Americans. We want to be covered by the promises in those founding documents. And it's not only the founding fathers. Our symbols are trashed. Our flag is burned. Leftist social justice warriors take a knee when the national anthem's being played. And by the way, I know you noticed when these things happen, Donald Trump, with everything he's got on his plate, takes on those leftist barbarians and calls them out. You know, the left goes nuts when he does that. The media goes crazy. What's he doing, attacking NFL football players? There are even Republicans who will say to him, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, "Mr. President, why are you getting into that? What are you getting in an argument with some football player? Keep focused on the agenda." It is the agenda. Thank you. Is that my wife? No, it isn't. Oh, okay. Look, we all, the agenda, lowering taxes, lowering capital gains taxes, deregulating business, rebuilding our military. Those are all wonderful things. We need to do all of those things. The president is doing those things. But none of those things will matter if our youth come to believe that America is not worth their love, devotion, and sacrifice. More and more schools have dropped the Pledge of Allegiance. When I was in school, we began the day with a prayer, non-denominational prayer. I'm sure many of you had the same thing, and the Pledge of Allegiance. A non-denominational prayer does not make somebody a believer, and a Pledge of Allegiance does not make somebody a patriot. But what it does do is tell young children that the adults in their lives believe that loving your country and seeking God are noble and decent things that they ought to think about and strive to do. A normal country would want their children to believe that. So the pledge, the prayer's gone. The pledge started getting undermined. There was a court decision saying you can't make kids stand up for the pledge if they've got religious or other objections. Then schools started saying, well, so many kids aren't standing up anymore. Maybe we should stop the pledge in the 5th or 6th grade. And now there are a lot of schools that don't even start the day with it. And often parents are clueless that that is the case. So what happens when you have an educational system that undermines your history, teaches your children that America was built and conceived in evil, slavery, genocide, all the rest of it? Well, those kids go through school, and then they go out in America and they run the corporations, and they go into the media, and they take all the things that young people who eventually become adults, all the jobs that adults take. And the research shows the rising generation coming out of our schools is the least patriotic generation in the history of America. That is a big deal, my friends, because we're living in an increasingly dangerous world. So we have incidents like the one we had just a few months ago. Nike, in some moment of rationality, decided that, wow, the 4th of July is coming up. Here's an idea. Why don't we put the Betsy Ross flag on a shoe? A lot of people will want to buy it. It's a patriotic thing. And so that's what they decided to do. I was a little surprised when I heard about the decision. But then shortly after that, that well-known intellect and world-famous historian Colin Kaepernick, the spokesman for Nike, called and said, that Betsy Ross flag, that's a symbol of slavery. What? And Nike folded like a cheap suit. Now look, increasingly, not only are U.S. corporations unwilling, particularly multinational corporations, are unwilling to stand for American values, many of them have become very effective lobbyists for Communist China, which is where I began my remarks. And negotiations on trade are going on right now. We don't know the details yet. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I can tell you this, whatever the outcome is, it would have been a better outcome if it was not for the pressure from the American business community. Over the last couple of years, when China's delegation would come to the United States to negotiate, they wouldn't fly into Washington, D.C. first. They would fly into New York. They would meet with the titans on Wall Street, and they would turn the screws on. Yeah, you're investing in China. We've been allowing you to do that, but this is not a blank check. You better start speaking up for us. I can't tell you, the president will never tell you, how many top corporate chieftains have called him and urged him to back off on all the pressure on China. About 25, 30 years ago, there was a big debate in this country on giving China most favored nation trading status. Every year this debate came up in the United States Congress. It was a huge battle. On one side of that debate, there were a lot of, in many cases, very good people that argued that if we would just make China more capitalist, they would become more free. That trade with China would change China. There was another group in that debate, and I am proud today to say that I was one of the leaders of the other side of that debate. I was president then of the Family Research Council, and I got us right in the middle of that debate. And I said, and others like me said, trade with China was much more likely to change us than it was to change China. When I say there were good people on both sides, I'm hesitant to tell you this because it's probably going to make you think less of me. I participated in a debate that was nationally televised where the other team that I was debating against was William F. Buckley, Henry Kissinger, Senator Trent Lott, and at that time the president of AT&T. And on my side, now hold on, was then Governor Brown of California, and this is when I'm going to get booed probably, and Ariana Huffington, who were arguing the same thing I was arguing, that you can't make communists into something they're not by trading with them. But eventually, in 2001, China was admitted to the World Trade Organization, and that meant there would never be another vote in the United States Congress on whether we wanted to continue this trade relationship with China. So once they were in the World Trade Organization, people in the business community began making their adjustments. And it didn't take long over the next couple of years with the process accelerating. 60,000, not 6,000, 60,000 American factories closed. And working class Americans watched their jobs head to Mexico and China. And they watched factories spring up all over China. And all during the decades that followed, while this was going on, Washington, D.C. got richer and richer. You can go down to K Street, which is the big lobbying street, and you will find lobbying firm after lobbying firm that has as one of its clients the People's Republic of China. In all the years of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, I'm not aware of one lobbying firm that ever thought it would be okay to represent the Soviet Union. But now there's money to be made, big money to be made. And there's people that drive a Mercedes home and every night after doing a great job for the commissars in Beijing. I'm reminded of what Lenin once said, first communist leader of the Soviet Union: we will sell the capitalists the rope we will eventually use to hang them. We have seen no limit to what some crony capitalists will do to keep pocketing communist cash. We have seen great American companies, Marriott, Delta, not only Nike, but Vons, the other shoe company, Kentucky Fried Chicken, for crying out loud. I grew up in Kentucky. Activision, many other companies, not just doing business in China. You can make a case sometimes to do business in China. No, I'm naming the companies that have been willing to fire their own employees if that employee says something that China's communists find offensive. I'm not exaggerating. Literally, an American working for one of those companies in St. Louis put something on his social media page about communism in China. Somebody from China saw it. He was gone in 48 hours. You saw what happened in the last week with the National Basketball Association. One general manager of one team tweeted something horribly controversial: stand with Hong Kong. Whoa, how dare he? I mean, does he realize what year it is? And it's amazing to me that the Chinese communists knew within 24 hours that some guy sitting in Texas on his personal email account said, stand with Hong Kong. The Chinese communists went nuts, and the NBA looked like a bunch of fools. Now, there's a real irony here, because the NBA walks around, has been doing this for years, very involved in American politics, standing up for social justice. NBA coaches have attacked the President of the United States. Teams have announced that if they win some championship, they will not grace the doors of the White House as long as that man is President of the United States. And man, the NBA, they've taken on some tyrants. I mean, they went after the state of North Carolina, the tyrants there. Do you remember that? North Carolina passed the law. I don't know what North Carolina was thinking. Again, it's 2019. But they passed this silly law that says that in North Carolina, men are not allowed to use the women's bathroom just because they think they're women. Do you know the NBA canceled an all-star game in North Carolina, citing that law? And so that woke league with all these social justice warriors caved to the communist Chinese because the NBA sees billions of dollars in their future in China. I'm not a prophet, but I can pretty well guess as the exhibition games that are starting to go on now in China where NBA teams go there and play games. By the way, the Chinese people love American professional basketball. I mean, it's not like the NBA needs China more than China needs the NBA. Chinese people would be very upset if they couldn't have access to watching the NBA anymore. But the NBA acted like they had no leverage at all. So I can pretty well predict that at these games in China, you won't see any NBA players taking a knee during the Chinese national anthem. So my friends, the next 50 years, in the lifetime of your children and grandchildren, the rest of the lifetime of us, the great competition, the great clash between the values of China and the values of the United States will define the age we are in. It will be a battlefield. It's already a battlefield all over the world, not just a military battlefield. That may never come. It may come. We don't know. But there's a battle for hearts and minds, and it's going on everywhere. China is building a world-class navy. They want to control the oceans of the world. They're lending third world countries billions of dollars to put those countries in China's back pocket. Let me tell you something that happened as I draw to a close here. A couple months ago, we had in Washington the second annual ministerial on international religious freedom. A ministerial is just a meeting of governments from around the world. We have an administration, the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom that Tony and I serve on. This is an administration that cares deeply about religious liberty here and around the world. So we invited the countries of the world for the second year in a row to come here to discuss that, how they can promote that in their own countries. Now we knew, the Trump administration knew, China wouldn't come to that meeting. It's not surprising. China's declared war on religious liberty, on all religions. Islam, Christianity, Buddhism. They're now making the churches in China take down drawings, pictures of Christ and replace them with pictures of Premier Xi. They're installing, with the help of American companies, facial recognition technology in the churches so that when you walk in the door, the Chinese government computers can mark down that you're a Christian. So not only did China not come, a bunch of countries we thought were going to come didn't show up. And I found out from Secretary of State Pompeo that China called countries around the world and said, you know, you owe us a couple $2 billion. You better think more carefully about the meetings you agree to go to. It would not be looked on as a friendly gesture here in China if you go to that meeting in Washington, D.C. to discuss religious liberty. And there were countries that bailed once they got that communication. American media virtually ignored the story. They're much more interested in a phone call between the president of Ukraine and the president of the United States than they are about the implications of China already being able to direct the foreign government decisions of dozens of countries that are not communists, but did not want to cross China, communist China. Well, it's a serious situation, and I just want to close by telling you that, you know, people will often come up to me and they'll say, you know, Mr. Bauer, what can I do about these issues? You know, I'm not that comfortable volunteering in politics. My friends, the most important thing each of us can do is to ensure that your children and grandchildren understand the nation they are citizens of. It's incredibly important. Our kids suffer from the same thing that all free men and women suffer from. They think the freedom they enjoy is the natural state of the world, that it's been natural throughout history. It hasn't been. You know, I remember talking to my family years ago and saying to them, and it set off a lot of conversation, just this little thought experiment. If we woke up, if the world woke up tomorrow, and because of some unspeakable tragedy, America was gone. Some disease that only killed Americans, some natural disaster that wiped the country off the map, some sneak attack by a foreign enemy that leveled us and made us no longer a factor. In very short order, not 100 years or 50 years or 20 years, in very short order, the world would sink into another dark age. The strong would prey on the weak, and the blood of the innocent would soak the ground. America is indispensable. Without us, liberty is smothered almost in an instant. So redevote ourselves. We all must do this. Redevote ourselves to teach our children to love the things we love and to honor the things we honor. Because unless we do that, America is done and liberty will die. God bless you all. Thank you very much.